Hello everybody, this is Leroy Cressy. Have you ever tried to boot your computer from a DVD or a USB flash drive? You may ask, why would I want to do such a thing? My Microsoft Windows is working fine. Why would I want to even think about booting from anything but the internal hard drive? One, you might have gotten a virus. And it totally destroyed your Windows system. And since you, hopefully you have been doing your backups on a regular basis, you have all your personal files saved. So you need to reinstall Windows. The second reason is you might be connected to a public Wi-Fi somewhere, like in a restaurant or a cafe or your local library. And if you're using Microsoft Windows or another system, and you're logging into like your bank account or something like that, some nefarious person might be at that site and pick up your password and the site that you're logging into and do bad stuff to you. So you might have a USB flash drive loaded with Tails, and you might want to be running the Tails operating system, which includes a lot of security devices to protect you from such nefarious people. Or you might have a system that might need some minor repair, and you might want to have use System Rescue CD or Alt Linux Rescue CD, which are both great systems for repairing your system or resizing your partitions or whatever. Many of the new computers, especially laptops and other smaller devices, do not come with DVD drives anymore. All they come with is a plethora of USB ports to plug stuff into. So you may have a Rescue CD ISO or System Rescue CCD ISO file, and you can burn a CD or a DVD with it, but you need to convert it to an ISO hybrid file that will also work on booting on a flash drive. Now, when you buy a flash drive, like this set of 3 here that I bought at Target some time ago, these 8 gigabyte discs, they come in packages of 3 and stuff like this. They're fairly cheap now. Instead of putting it on a DVD, you have to put the ISO image onto one of those. Now, this is a problem because these drives come pre-formatted with the MBR uh, or MS-DOS partitioning scheme, and that will not necessarily boot very well on a UEFI system. Currently, the UEFI chipset is able, you can basically force it to boot a MBR partition disk, but I have the feeling that in the near future or something like that, that's going to be dropped. So you're going to be forced to use a UEFI partitioned flash drive to boot anything other than the installed Microsoft Windows. The final thing is that you just might possibly want to make your into a dual bootable machine and have either FreeBSD, Linux distribution of your choice loaded on your laptop besides Windows. And that requires, first you have to resize the partition, the Windows partition and stuff like this, and create new partitions to install your new Linux system. Now, I originally wrote this presentation back in July of 2016 after having a lot of trouble making my new Acer laptop dual bootable. This new laptop uses the UEFI chipset, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, which will not boot by default a MBR, commonly called MS-DOS partitioned disk or flash drive. My new laptop did not come equipped with a DVD drive. Thus, I originally attempted to create a bootable flash drive using the DD command as instructed by the Arch Linux website and a plethora of other websites. They said, oh, you just can copy the ISO image to the flash drive using DD and it should work. Well, with the UEFI BIOS system, it didn't work. Because most of the websites that had the how-tos are a difficult thing to write. And they take some time and they take some effort to create and write. And with the new UEFI chipset, it makes it a lot more difficult to write and design. So the ones that are responsible for writing and the wiki pages for the Arch Linux system and others, I understand their problem, because all of a sudden it makes it a lot more difficult under this new system. And then first, before you write and how-to on how to do stuff, you have the learning curve of relearning everything you knew about partitioning schemes and learn something brand new before you even think about writing a how-to. Most websites did not tell you that you had to change the ISO image into a hybrid ISO image that is capable of both being used on a DVD or CD-ROM and on a USB flash drive. Thus, almost all distributions have ISO images for creating DVDs, but they're not hybrid ISO images for making DVDs or USB flash drives. Therefore, before we begin, we want to take a look at the UEFI Wikipedia page and learn a little bit about the UEFI standard. Now, this is a fairly extensive wiki page. This is just not a couple paragraphs. This goes on and on and on. And why would you want to read something like this? First of all, you might want to learn what we are doing. The second thing is, your new computer doesn't work the same way that computers used to work. And you might want to find out why. There are several changes between BIOS and UEFI. First of all, there are different tools to use. Under the MBR system or MS-DOS system, you used FDisk to partition your drive. Under the UEFI system, you must use GDisk because you are creating a GPT partition disk instead of an MBR partition disk. You can use Linux tools such as Parted or gparted. I prefer gparted because it works. It's a nice X-Windows system. It looks pretty. It's easy to use, and it will create both MS-DOS and GPT partition disks. Another thing I have found is with the UEFI system, Grub is a pain. Grub just doesn't work as good as it used to work. Even though the Grub version 2, which is supposed to be, and I say, quote, supposed to be UEFI compatible, it's not designed solely for UEFI partitions. There are bootloaders that are available specifically for UEFI systems, and one of them is REFind, which is the one that I found that works very well, and it's very easy to use, configure, and set up. And you don't have to have a steep learning curve to learn how to use the thing. Now, people like me that have been around and been playing with Linux since almost from the beginning. I started off with kernel 1.1.13 back in 1994. And we started off with a bootloader called Lilo, and then you had to learn how to configure Lilo. Then came the Grand Unified Bootloader, which is called Grub, and we had to relearn how to configure that. Now we have to relearn another bootloader just to get Linux and Windows and everything else talk on the same page. Because you have a UEFI system and you have to relearn how to use that. It makes everything more difficult. On a side note, some UEFI chips make it excruciatingly difficult to boot anything but your preloaded Microsoft Windows. In other words, the manufacturer is really fighting you, and the chip maker is fighting you, and Microsoft is fighting you to prevent you from loading the operating system of your choice. Now, the GPT partition has a special partition called the ESP partition or EFI system partition. Now, according to the UEFI Wikipedia page, the suggested size of this partition is 512 megabytes. Now, with drives being in the terabyte range today, 512 megabytes might not seem like a lot. Rita and I still have our old 386 computer that still works, and it originally came with a 20 megabyte drive, and we put in a 30 megabyte drive in the thing, and we found that the maximum partition size that was available was 20 megabytes. So you had a 30 megabyte drive, and you had to partition it into two partitions. One partition primarily for your MS-DOS operating system, and the second partition primarily for your personal stuff. So you had a C drive and a D drive. But that was back in the early 90s. Now, according to the MS-DOS or MBR partitioning scheme, you had a maximum disk size of 2 terabytes. Nobody thought back in the 1980s when the MS-DOS partitioning scheme was invented, nobody ever thought that you would have a terabyte hard drive. But now you can buy a 8 terabyte hard drive today, which happens to be Monday, April 24, 2016 or 2017, for $300. In the 90s, a terabyte worth of disk space filled up a whole room of hardware. Now you can buy an 8 terabyte drive. The P partition must be a FAT32 partition that has the boot flag set and the ESP flag set. Now, if you mistakenly have gparted set to make an MS-DOS partition, there is no ESP flag. You must build the partition as a GPT partition. Now, the ESP partition contains several things. It contains kernels. It contains bootloaders. And it contains special files like bootx64.efi. And they're executable files that work on the boot process. And they are executed by the UEFI chipset when the system boots. Now, on my main computer, and I ran a df-h/dev/sda1, which is an ESP partition that is 512 megabytes, is only using 2 megabytes of it, right? And there's 510 megabytes left, and it's only using 1%. The next system I build, I'll probably go with 128 megabytes or something like that, rather than the suggested 512 megabytes. But by all means, you should consult the EFI system partition Wikipedia page for more information. Now, the ESP partition is a very special partition, which sort of, and I'm saying sort of, it doesn't really, it's not really that clear. It doesn't really take the place of the master boot record, but it sort of like takes the place of it. Okay, and then there's another Wikipedia page that you should read, which describes the guild partition table, or GPT partition table. Now, before we use gparted, you should read the wiki page to find out specifically what we are doing. And this page contains a good amount of information for you. Okay, the old MBR system had a maximum disk size of 2 terabytes. The UEFI guild partition table has a maximum disk size of 9.4 zettabytes, or 9.4 times 10 to the 21st power. Now, a terabyte is 1 times 10 to the 12th power. For all you guys that want a comparison on stuff, at the present time, the national debt is almost at $20 trillion. Now, $20 trillion is 20 with 12 more zeros added onto it, or 20 times 10 to the 12th power. A zettabyte has 21 zeros added onto it. So that shows you what a big number that is. One of the most interesting things I've noticed in this item is that the guild partition Wikipedia has this wonderful graphic describing two unallocated spaces that are about a megabyte each, one at the beginning of the drive and one at the end of the drive. And these contain the primary and secondary GPT header files. Now the GPT headers are described in the Wikipedia page in detail. Just assume that you do not want to overwrite that 1 megabyte of disk space at the beginning or that 1 megabyte of disk space at the end. That is called unallocated. You don't want to mess with those. Another thing that is a good thing about the guild partition table is that whereas with the MBR system you had 4 primary partitions and you would take the 4th partition and make it an extended partition for more partition space. With the guild partition you have 128 primary partitions. Now using gparted. The first thing is to make sure that we are creating a GPT partition disk. Using the device menu, you can select create partition table and you will be presented with a plethora of different types of partition schemes, with default being MS-DOS. The ESP partition, the SP partition, should probably be your first partition. Though I did not read anything or any references to this claim, I just think it should be. Based on my knowledge of computers and stuff like this, it makes sense. For the flash drive, I'm going to make the entire drive one partition for the Arch distribution, since permissions and ownership are not necessary for the installation process. When you create the partition table, there is a submenu that comes up that under device called create partition table, and you can see I have selected create a GPT partition. But GPT enables you to create many partition schemes like Amiga. How many of you remember the old Amiga machines from the 1980s? Or an AIX partition, which was created by IBM for the AIX mid-size computers back in the 70s. BSD partitions, Sun partitions, Mac partitions. You have all kinds of partitioning schemes. But for us using the UEFI BIOS, and we want this system to be a bootable system, we're going to create a GPT partition. After you select the partition that you want to create, press the apply button. Now we need to create a new FAT32 partition. So you click on the new button to create a partition. Gparted automatically defaults to creating an ext4 partition. And we need to change that to a FAT32 partition on our flash drive. And the default size will be to fill up the 8 gig flash drive I'm using. Now I remember back when we had floppy drives. And floppy drives were little plastic devices, primarily either 720 byte or 1.44 megabyte in size. Now we have these flash drives that are gigabytes or billions of bytes in size, not millions anymore. And now Arch Linux insists upon on a funny thing of booting by label. Thus, you must label the partition that we're making specifically to what the Arch Linux system expects, which is Arch 2016-06, which is the version of the Arch Linux system that I was using back last year. When you are done, just press the Add button. You cannot set the flags yet, so you must apply the changes. Next, we will right-click on the new FAT partition that we just created and select Manage Flags. We will select either boot or ESP. You select one, the other one will automatically be selected for you, and the MSFT data flag will be deselected. And press the close button. Finally, at the end, we want to verify everything, and we do a final check before we close Gparted. We make sure that the SP and the boot flags are set and the partition is properly labeled, and that the FAT partition is the correct size that we want. Now you can mount you can get the partition label correct. You should have mounted the Arch ISO image to /mount/ISO or wherever you want to mount it at, and make sure that the label is properly set and that it matches. Now, when we're copying the ISO image, there are a couple things that you must remember. When you are copying to a FAT partition, there is no ownership on a FAT partition. Though Linux may show that you are that root is the owner, in reality, there is no ownership. There is no Unix permissions of read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, write, execute for owner, group, and all others. The solution to this, the easiest solution that I found, is for copying from the ISO image to the flash drive, is use -L for symbolic links and with rsync. Now the -L option converts all symlinks to the files that are pointed to. Now using rsync. Now rsync, I prefer using rsync for copying, primarily because it verifies the copy. rsync automatically allows me to automatically convert symbolic links to the normal files that they're pointing to. And so first of all, you need to mount your newly created flash FAT32 partition using mount/dev/sdc1 or whatever your device calls for, /mount/SanDisk. Now it is time to rsync the contents of the ISO image to the flash drive. rsync -LAV /mount/ISO asterisk /mount/SanDisk. -L converts symbolic links to the files that are pointing to. A stands for archive, which means redundancy, timestamps, ownership, and file permissions are all copied. And V is verbose. Primarily, it's the timestamps and the redundancy that we're primarily interested in. Finally, we come to syslinux. Now, most Linux distributions do not come already installed with syslinux. You have to install that yourself. Syslinux is a small bootloader that will make your flash drive bootable. Now, these commands I found on Ask Ubuntu website. The first one is syslinux/dev/sdc1. cd/mount/SanDisk, and then you want to move the ISO Linux directory to syslinux. You want the CD into the syslinux, the newly created syslinux directory, and move the ISO linux.cfg to syslinux.cfg. When you look at the USB site, the Ask USB site, you see that a lot of other people have had the same problem. Next is to prepare your laptop. And to do this, you have to go into the UEFI system setup on boot. Now, each computer that you buy has a different key to press to enter setup. So you have to see the instructions and follow them, and it's very fast usually. First, you need to turn off Safe Boot. Now, turning off Safe Boot might require you to set up an administrator password. You want to turn on the F12 boot selection, and you want to move the USB hard disk drive to the top of the menu. Now we come to RE-Find. Now I found that using Grub with the new UEFI system to be an arduous task and a pain. And I do not like pain. Now I realize that most distributions use Grub as the default. I also realize that most people do not like changing their bootloader. I remember back in the early 90s when everyone was using Lilo as the Linux loader. Then all of a sudden Richard Stallman created the Grand Unified Bootloader. And we all had to learn how to configure this new system. Now, we have to learn again on a new, and I chose RE-Find, first of all, because it's not complicated, it's very easy to configure, and it's easy to learn. And I'd rather have stuff that's easy rather than difficult. I'm basically lazy. Now, for those of you having trouble booting your laptop, on the RE-Find website, after installing Linux, your favorite distribution of Linux, Rod has a zip file that contains an image file just for putting on a flash drive, on an empty flash drive, and you just can DD this image file to your to an empty flash drive and RE-Find, and it will be automatically configured as a GPT partition drive, and RE-Find will take up the beginning of the drive. And you can put anything else on there you want, because it will only be about 128 megabytes of an 8 gig flash drive. The RE-Find website is a very informative website. It tells you how to configure RE-Find and the design principles, and etc. Now, RE-Find is specifically made for the UEFI BIOS system. So whereas Grub is made for everything, and Grub version 2 is supposedly supposed to work on UEFI systems, a lot of people have been having a lot of troubles booting your new flash drive. Now is the time to see if all of your efforts work. You plug in your flash drive, turn on your laptop, and see if it boots to where you want it to boot. And you can install a new operating system. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. I hope you found this this video informative and useful. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free. I want to thank all the people in the open source community, the KDE people that make KDEN Live, which is the video editor I use, Libre Office, Open Office, and the GIMP, and etc. all were used in creating this video. Have a great day. May the Lord bless you all, and take care. Bye-bye.